This is The Huddle, presented by the Midwest Christian Boys Football Camp, otherwise known as Man Camp. Welcome to The Huddle. Hey friend, welcome to The Huddle. I'm your host, Mike McCurry, and I'm joined again this week by a guest. I have none other than Pastor Jay Griggs with us. He's going to give us his testimony as we begin this week of broadcasts. We've got to get out of the way because people will comment. I didn't tell Brother Griggs that this was a video podcast, a video version. And so I do have a question, though. Even though you didn't know, why do you have a red shirt on? I've got to ask. Don't you just wear green underwear? And like, isn't like the Hulk your spirit animal? And like, you're always about green all the time? Or the 51 weeks out of the year, you allow yourself some liberties?
Believe it or not, Micah, the only time I wear a green shirt is during football camp.
So it's actually out of your norm.
It is.
But it's ride or die green at football camp. Besides that, and so I didn't tell him. So to help supplement, I added some green lights in the background if you're watching on YouTube. But we've got that out of the way. Tell us about your testimony. Of course, you didn't really grow up with the stereotypical Christian home to some degree, and so there's a lot of boys probably listening, come to football camp, have a similar background. So talk to us for a minute about that.
Yes, I was saved at the age of 17, and I did not grow up in a good, godly Christian home. I was raised primarily by my mom and my stepfather most of my life. A lot of different abuse in the home, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, mental abuse, any kind of abuses that are out there today. Pretty much most of it was included in the home in which I grew up in. When I was 17 years old, ultimately, I had become a product of the environment that I was raised in. Obviously, you have an ungodly home where God is not the focus and the center of the home. Morality was bad, a lot of different things. But whenever I was 17 years old, I was in the ninth grade. It wasn't because I was intellectually challenged by any means. It was simply for the fact that I was involved in gangs and drugs, a lot of fighting. I was skipping school oftentimes. But I remember being 17, kind of being kicked out, but kind of being asked to leave. It was a mutual thing. So I left and I went to go live with several friends, went to live with one friend, got kicked out, went to live with another friend, got kicked out. And the last few days that I was there in the state of Texas where I grew up in Dallas-Fort Worth area, but I was living on the streets actually. Matter of fact, one of the last nights that I lived in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, I slept on a basketball court, Brother Micah, and I used a backpack for a pillow. But I remember I called my father who lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I called him collect. Back in those days, you had payphones, and you can still do that. But I called him collect, and he answered the phone, accepted the call. And I said, Dad, I am living on the streets. I really pretty much have no place to go. Having issues with my mom and in the home. And he said to me, son, he said, you can come live with me, but I got two rules. Number one, you obey the rules of my house. And number two, you go to church every time we go to church. And I thought, well, it's only going to be Sunday morning. I can handle that. And I had been to church prior to going to live with my dad a handful of times, primarily just to go with my friends or check out the girls or whatever. And so I thought I can handle it. So he paid for a plane ticket for me to fly from Fort Worth, Texas to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I'll never forget getting off the plane. I had a bag full of my clothes, and I had my hair slicked back, and I had my earring in and my necklace on and my baggy clothes. And I just thought I was a cool dude. And I remember getting off the airplane, and he said, okay, now before you go any further, you need to take your earring out. And so I took my earring out and I gave it to him. And so drove home. I actually flew into New Orleans, and we drove home. It was about an hour from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. That was on Tuesday, and then the following Wednesday, he said, okay, they're going teen soul winning. And I was like, okay, what's teen soul winning? Never knew that. So you're going to have to go since your stepbrothers are going. So I went with them, and there I was as a teenager baggy clothes. I remember I had literally, Brother Mike, my pants were sagging like halfway to my bottom. And I had one of those, in those days, the braided belts were real popular. And you would take it and you would, obviously, I make it as tight as I could be. And then there was probably 2 feet of length past that. So it'd take it and there was a certain way that you'd braid it. And there I was going soul winning. I was the silent partner. And then we went to McDonald's. The only reason why I was like, okay, cool, because they said, here's some money, you can go to McDonald's after soul winning. So then we went to church that night. I'll never forget going to church, sitting down with folks, and sat down, and I kind of hunched back like this, like a teenager would, you know, how they, I just thought I was a cool dude. And there were people that came up to me and that said, hey, you know, we've been praying for you. We're glad you're here, put their arms around me and gave me a hug and different things of that nature. But I thought to myself, who are these people? And I don't know you and you're praying for me. But needless to say, my father on a regular basis during Wednesday night prayer meeting would ask people to pray for his lost son who lived in Texas for many, many, many months and even years. Wow. That he requested prayer requests for me. And so I went to church, and as I was going to church, now my pastor was Brother Bob Buchanan, and as I was going to church, let me back up. So the Thursday after that Wednesday, Brother Buchanan came by and he dropped off a bed for me because I'd slept on the floor in our house that night, and he introduced himself and talked to me a little bit, and I laid out, he said, how you doing? I laid out all these things that were wrong with my life, all these different things. And I just told him, you know, I dealt with this and I dealt with that. And he you know, I was just laying out how I was a victim of everything. And he looked at me, and if you knew Brother Buchanan, he was not the emotional type of person by any means. He just looked at me and he was like, okay, are you done yet? And I said, yes, sir. I said, yeah. And he said, no, it's yes, sir. Okay. And I was like, okay, yes, sir. And he said, well, you could choose to be a victim all your life, or you could choose to be a victor. And that spoke to me as a teenage boy who'd never been confronted by a real man about how to deal with problems. So anyway, I went through church, and Sunday night, Wednesday night, Sunday night, Wednesday morning, teen soul winning, revivals, different things like that. And over the course of time, I changed my clothes, I changed my life, I changed my mouth, the way that I talked, I changed my music. But it was about 6 months after that, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, 7 months after I got there, that I realized that I needed to be saved. And it was there November 8th of 1996, there at 3134 Quebec Drive in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. On my floor that night, laying next to my bed, I trusted the Lord as my Savior, was baptized the next Sunday. Shortly thereafter, Ron Garris came to preach a revival, and I surrendered to preach then. And I'll never forget Brother Garris laying hands on me that night and just, you know, praying, oh, God, use this young man. I thought to myself, okay, all right, maybe I'll just do something. Brother Buchanan, he was not emotional. So whenever I told him, hey, I surrender to preach, he's like, okay, well, I pray that God uses you. That was it. No going before the church. No, everyone clap for him, cheer for him, anything like that. And so anyway, long story short, because I was the new person in the youth group, even though I got saved. Now, the youth group at that time, they didn't have a youth pastor, Brother Micah. They had a man filling in who did the best job he possibly could. They had a man filling in as a youth leader, but the youth group was really carnal, involved in alcohol and fornication and all sorts of stuff. And because I was the new Christian, because I was a carnal person, I was starting to get involved in that. And then some of it was coming out in the youth group, who was doing what, preacher was dropping the hammer, you know, different things like that. And I thought to myself, you know what, I got saved out of this.
Right.
I was brought out of this situation, and now I'm going back into it, but this time it's in the realm of Christianity. And I was starting to get in trouble, and I didn't want to face the music. So I thought to myself, you know what, if this is Christianity, I could still be saved and go back to Texas. And so I had my mind made up. I was going to go back to Texas, just be saved and find a church, and you know, that was it. And I had my bags packed, and then there was an evangelist the next Sunday morning. This was on a Saturday. I determined, hey, I was going to go back to Texas. There was an evangelist that came in Sunday morning by the name of Tim Booth. And I never heard of this guy. He presented this ministry. Now, this was back in 1996.
Would have been
Or
second
no,
or
it was
third.
the beginning of 97, so it was January.
Third year, maybe.
January, and he talked about football camp, and I was still of age and had the ability to go there and play, but I played public school football, and I thought, it's just a little, rinky-dink camp and different things like that. But I didn't realize it was more than just about football. But I want to go back to the message that he preached on that Sunday morning. He preached a message out of the book of Colossians in chapter 1. And it was basically entitled For When Life Knocks You Down. And the message was pushing through perseverance. And I made a decision that morning that I wasn't going to go back to camp. Or go back to Texas.
Right.
That I was going to go forward and push through the adversity that I myself have created.
Right.
And just stick with it.
Amen.
And because of that decision, I'm where I'm at today. And to this very day, that was the first time I heard of Brother Booth. That was the first time that I heard him preach. And I was thinking about, it wasn't until like several years, 2-3 years later, that I heard Brother Booth again, but it was during that tenure that I was in Bible college. He came to the college I went to, Providence Baptist College. He was preaching in chapel. And I said, I don't know if you remember me, or you don't even know me. I don't know you. But I laid out that story. And he got a tear in his eyes, and he said, I go to these churches just a Sunday sometimes, never know who I am involved with or who's listening and who I make a difference in.
Wow.
But that meant the world to him that I did that. And to this very day, I believe that was a very pivotal moment in my Christian life after I got saved as a young person. Just to be willing to allow someone like Brother Booth to influence me. And that was so that was in 97, so that was 26 years ago. And I'll say this, from 26 years ago, the Brother Booth that I met 26 years ago is still the same Brother Booth that I know today in 2023. Very, very consistent man. So in a nutshell, that was whenever I was saved and how God started working in my life as a young man.
Amen. What a blessing to hear a story of God's grace. We're going to continue the remainder of this week with Pastor Griggs. Excited to talk about, you sent some boys yourself to football camp. You brought young men from your churches to football camp. And it's amazing to see how a seed that was planted by one of the founders and directors of Man Camp today, and as you said, is a man that's continuing to influence young men for the cause of Christ today, the same way he was 26 years ago, and to see this multi-generational thing, kind of a partnership of generations. I'm excited to continue in the huddle. If this story was a blessing to you, pass it on to someone. Share the link with someone. Let them know. And you should consider coming to the Midwest Christian Boys Football Camp. If you need more information, mancamp1994.org. That's mancamp1994.org. Brother Griggs is sticking around all this week. God bless. Thank you for listening to The Huddle. You can find more information and register for Man Camp online at mancamp1994.org. Man Camp is a ministry of the First Baptist Church in Dwight, Illinois. Join us next time in The Huddle.